Good evening. My name is Michael Marshall. I'm a member of Chebucto Community Net, and you've heard a lot about a plan for the future, and a lot of Nova Scotian governments are reluctant to do anything the first time. I want to tell you about the past, 100 years ago. What we're talking about today was commonplace in Nova Scotia. There were 300 telecommunication companies. It peaked in the 30s, but even back at the turn of the last century, there were hundreds of telecommunications companies. One was an elephant called Bell. MT&T, Bell Alliant, same company. The other 299 mice were small companies, usually called mutual companies, which was a co-op, but more in fact were small independent entrepreneurs. Typically, if you've ever sat in a Nova Scotia school, you've sat in a Bass River school desk. It's a small factory about 30 miles north of Truro. They put in a telephone line to connect the manager, the boiler plant, and the factory. Now, they had excess capacity, just as Valley Fibre Net does now. They run a line down the valley, they've got excess capacity unused. So local neighbors would come to the guy and say, why don't you put me on? So all this kind of stuff we're talking about today has been done before. Next slide, please. Now, the problem was there were two different visions, and as it happens, they were both Nova Scotian, both Cape Bretoners. That guy's Bell. He made a lot of money. The company he set up was very tough enforcing its patents and chasing down any competitors. Soon became the world's largest corporate entity. This guy, you may not recognize, Moses Cody, another Cape Bretoner, he said that a province the size of Nova Scotia, with only about 600,000 people, not very wealthy, needed to counterbalance this guy. And he said we needed co-ops, telephone companies, to keep Bell honest. The next slide. Okay. So what I want to emphasize is Bell was never one legal corporation. It was a cartel in the sense that it was a bunch of related companies that basically supported each other, particularly through standards. You had to have a certain standard kind of piece of equipment which you bought from a Bell subsidiary to get it to all work. And they kept the prices low for Bell itself, and for all those little mutual companies, the price was quite high. Now the mutual companies survived because they basically sweat volunteered the poles, the labor, etc. Next slide, please. Now, Cody did have some success. We had hundreds of these all through the province. The last one disappeared, as far as I know, in the 80s. There may be still one left. Is Berwick? Berwick is still a municipally owned example. All right, the next slide, please. Now, what I want to emphasize is that Bell is extremely powerful, even though between the 40s till about the 80s, it was broken up in pieces at the American level, and they made them spin off the Canadian companies and the Caribbean companies and so on. But believe me, it still basically rules the telecommunications world around the world through the enforcing of standards, and just because it is so big and such deep pockets. They do not need any of our money. The next slide, please. Okay. Much to our surprise, I think a week or two ago, Friday night, that's the time when you have something you really are not very comfortable with, whether you're the Prime Minister or a Premier, that's when you release a press release, usually 4 o'clock on Friday night. You can get away with murder at that point. This guy gave $2 million to one of the wealthiest companies in the world. Did not give any money to either their commercial competitors, big or small commercial competitors, or to any of the non-profits or of the municipal-based or co-op competitors to align. The next slide, please. So he gave them $2 million, which frankly Bell does not need, but Bell wanted that kind of imprimatur of government approval, that they're almost like an official wing of the government giving you fibre. Now, we kind of hoped that under a relatively left-wing government, we might get a guy who was more like Robin Hood. He would take from people like Bell and give to, Valley Fibre Network. That hasn't been the case. Now, we still have a problem. We're no bigger than we were in the day of Moses Cody. We're 900,000 people. Bell, if anything, has gotten bigger, and we still don't have the counterbalance. I mean, their revenue is much bigger than this province. We just don't have the power to totally control them. So what we need, next slide, is we need to balance it. And what the municipal and mutual and privately owned little telephone companies did 100 years ago was their rates were public, as were Bell's. And you could not, in fact, move from Sydney out to Marguerite Forks to take advantage of the lower rates there. But because it was public and you talked to your uncle who lived down in Marguerite Forks, you put Bell under the gun not to raise the rates as high as they could. Now, to give you an example, in other utilities where there was none of this sort of opportunity to see an alternate session, electrical rates in Montreal were scandalously like 40 times as high as they might be in another city, or water rates, or streetcar rates. So without kind of a little balance, you could in fact see monopolies raising rates to levels you just would not believe would be possible, well above what a profit figure would be. So there is still a need for local little guys to keep the big guys honest in terms of what it costs and what you get. Can I have another slide? Now, starting in the 50s, that 300 companies started reducing, and here's why. Bell had the best equipment, the newest equipment. All the mutuals had was customers. And the point I'd like to make is that all those bells and whistles, as that man there has got, will go nowhere if you don't have a customer to pick up the bell and whistle. So you need customers. So despite the fact that the equipment that the mutual companies have was pretty old and primitive, MT&T sat down trying to buy them up. Could I have another slide, please? Eventually they got them all because they desperately need the customers. And I think you here tonight in the community of Bedford should always realize, next slide please, that you have the whip hand. You may not be Betty Page, if that's her name, but you are the customers. You're the people that Alliant is chasing. And if you own the last quarter mile, that little community box, that green box, and the quarter mile that runs down your subdivision, and you and your neighbors are connected up to, that's when Eastlink and Bell and all their others have to come to you begging to be into that system, despite the fact that they may have literally billions upon billions of dollars of equipment upstream, all across Canada, around the world. You, at the bottom end, are the key element, the customer. The bum on the seat, the paying customer. Okay, so how would I advocate that you could pay for it here in Bedford? You haven't got a couple of $1,000s to sort of put fiber into your home in one fell swoop, but you don't want to pay $150 a month every month for the rest of your life for very piss poor service from Alliant or Eastlink. What are you going to do? Well, you sometimes have to put in sidewalks in your homes, and the way you do it is a local improvement charge. Your municipality bills you every month in some fashion. It could be on your twice annual taxes. It could be on your water rates. There are various ways of doing it, but it's a charge that will pay off gradually, kind of a mini mortgage, the cost of running that fiber down to your street into your home. But from now on, you own it. And as you've been told here tonight, you never have to replace that fiber. It never grows obsolete. So that's what I'd like you to consider. Thank you very much.